In recent weeks, France has started an intervention in northern Mali, and Islamist terrorists have attacked a gas plant in Algeria. A general feeling of unease has come across North Africa. I'm Oliver August, the Africa editor of The Economist, and with me is John Marks of Cross Border Information. John, how worried should we be about this? And I guess how much of this is related and how much of it is really a local issue that has now been swept up?
I think we should be very worried about it. I think that we shouldn't, like some policymakers seem to be doing, panic about it. But these are very major events on a number of levels. I mean, on the first level, clearly, you had the the French intervention in Mali, which was a surprise, but it was a reaction to events that have been unfolding very quickly. But those are long-term events, added to which you have the even longer-term problems of the crisis in the Sahel region, from demographics to desertification. So at the moment you've got Western policymakers, African policymakers and populations all turning around and trying to make sense and saying, where does this crisis come from? Is it all interrelated? We're now hearing language. We saw David Cameron turning around and actually in one intervention sounding very much like George Bush unleashing the global war on terror. I think people are stepping back from that now, but policymakers are talking about this supposed arc of instability, which I fear is going to be a leitmotif for policymaking and political discourse over the weeks and months to come. And in order to back up the arc of instability idea, people are looking for linkages.
The transnational nature of these groups, is that something recent? Is that something that's integral to them? Or are they really just sort of local organizations that have attracted a few followers from further afield?
You know, I think for policymakers and for understanding this, this is the critical question. And at the moment, it's not really well known. If you look at the various groups that are involved, there are clearly alliances. The people who took over in northern Mali were a series of groups, but you could say, well, Mujal, there was links into the Mauritanians. In Mali, there were original groups, Tuareg groups. But they've kind of coalesced. If you look at the In Amenas attack and the more recent reports that have come out of Algeria from the Algerian security services, although the leadership of that group was Algerian, what you actually see is a large number of Libyans, Tunisians, and of course the reports that a couple of the people were Canadians, which have got the Canadian government at this moment scurrying very fast to try and find out, was that actually the case? Now this is a multinational franchise. The key question, I think, Oliver, is was it a one-off, or are we actually seeing that franchise has crystallized, developed, and the kind of rhetoric that came up in the global war of terror so long ago finally finding a resolution in the Sahara?
You obviously look at a situation here that is very confused and angry at the moment, but underlying this are sort of longer term changes, and I'm not just talking about the sort of slow Islamization of or sort of growth of extremism, but also forces like the desertification that is making life generally more difficult in this area. How much of that you think is directly connected?
You know, in policy terms, I remember writing an article last year which actually the headline was "Climate change is already here," and it's looking at the Sahel, and this is very well known. It's not, there's no secret. If you look at the atlases, for example, that have been done using pictures from NASA, look at the diminution of Lake Chad. Look at the town at the very centre of the crisis in Mali, Timbuktu. I mean, we're looking at one of the major cultural centres of the world for a millennium, and these places are disappearing under the sand. It's not that we didn't know about it. It's really been a crisis of what do we do, how much aid can happen, how much can the governance of the countries involved be improved. After all, these are crises. People who've joined the radical movements, or who sympathise with them, or who are just angry, or who are seeing their polities fail, are actually responding to governments and political systems that are not fit for purpose. That's a crisis right the way across the region, and that underpins it, because at the end of the day, when we're looking at the security and the terrorists, the In Amenas attack, you know, you've got 11 Libyans, 10 Tunisians, whatever. These are relatively small groups. There are not that many people involved in the actual politics of terror, but what there are huge populations that are completely alienated and whose very lifestyles have been threatened. Your Somali pirate who was a fisherman, your desert farmer, your transhumance pastoralist, all of these are losing their land and ending up in cities, camps that just do not function. There is a connection there. You're going to have extreme violence and recruiting for ultra-radical movements, but those ultra-radical movements at the moment aren't mass movements. But what is the problem is the rest of the consensus in these societies isn't there to see them off, because these societies, and particularly the economies on which they depend, are failing in a region where all the economic indicators really are disastrous.
John Marks, thank you very much.
Thank you.